Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio, and today we are talking about the fact that new Lord of the Rings movies are coming out, but not from Amazon, but from Warner Brothers of all places, coming from the Hollywood Reporter. New Lord of the Rings movies in the works at Warner's New Line. The studios have struck a multi-year pact with Swedish gaming giant Embracer Group, which holds the film rights to the property. Warner Brothers and New Line are going back to Middle-earth, with the studio making a deal that will allow it to develop more Lord of the Rings movies. The multi-year pact with rights holders Embracer Groups, Embracer Groups AB, allows Warner's to develop features based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit. Embracer Group, the Swedish gaming company, acquired the rights to produce LOTR films, games, merchandise, theme park attractions, and live productions when it purchased rights holder Middle-earth Enterprises last year from the Saul Zaentz company. I think it's how you pronounce it, Saul Zaentz. The move, announced during Warner Bros. Discovery's investor call Thursday, comes as CEO David Zaslav seeks to assure Wall Street that Warner's is very much in the franchise game, here harking back to the 2000s glory days when the studio was minting money with Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. In November, Zaslav said he would like to make a deal with author J.K. Rowling for more Harry Potter, and initially floated the notion of a Lord of the Rings return. Peter Jackson directed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, released from 2001 to 2003. The series earned a combined $2.9 billion at the box office, with 2003's Return of the King winning the Oscar for Best Picture. Jackson returned to direct the Hobbit trilogy, released from 2012 to 2014. New Line already had the animated feature The War of Rohirrim on the calendar for 2024. So I would like to point out that all of these fandom ministers that are complaining about, Rings of Power being so bad, and that you should boycott the War of Rohirrim, because however you pronounce it, I don't know how to pronounce it, Rohirrim or something like that, the War of Rohirrim. Anyway, they're all saying, to boycott that movie, boycott this movie, because Lord of the Rings is dead, blah, 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 despite the fact that War of the Rohirrim is not coming from Amazon, the makers of Rings of Power. It's coming from New Line Cinema. So, yes, now you're going to have competing Lord of the Rings projects. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. In a statement, Jackson and his Lord of the Rings partners, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, know they were aware of the latest development, said the trio, quote, "Warner Bros. And Embracer have kept us in the loop every step of the way. We look forward to speaking with them further to hear their vision for the franchise moving forward." Jackson previously noted that Amazon asked him to be involved in its Lord of the Rings TV show, but then did not follow up. Rights to the Tolkien works have always been a little dicey, and a legal dispute between Warner's and the Tolkien estate went on for years before being settled in 2017. A newer, complicating matter from a consumer standpoint, Amazon holds the TV rights to Lord of the Rings, with its mega-budget Rings of Power debuting last year. One question the new series of films will face is how to convince audiences to go to the theater if they can get their fix at home. Anyway, let's keep reading. I'm getting a little ahead of myself again. One big difference here is Amazon focuses on the Second Age, thousands of years before the events of the films. The movie rights have focused on the Third Age, when the best-known events happen and most beloved characters lived. And just to put it into perspective for you guys, the Third Age basically consists of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King. That's what they refer. That's what's referred to as the Third Age for those of you that are not really that familiar with Lord of the Rings outside of the movies. It's possible that Warner's could now focus on new stories centering Tolkien's big guns such as Gandalf, Bilbo, and Aragorn. And of course, as much as new movies present opportunities for big franchise swings, they will come under fan scrutiny just as much as the current Warner's franchise plays, such as DC and Fantastic Beasts do. In a statement with those working on the projects acknowledged the task ahead, quote, "We understand how cherished these works are, and working together with our partners at New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers Pictures, we plan to honor the past, look to the future, and adhere to the strongest level of quality and production value," said Lee Guinchard, CEO of Free Mode, which is part of Embracer. And Warner Brothers film bosses Michael DeLuca and Pamela Abdy signaled that they are not interested in a retread of what Jackson has already done, saying in their own statement, quote, 20 years ago, New Line took an unprecedented leap of faith to realize the incredible stories, characters, and world of The Lord of the Rings on the big screen. The result was a landmark series of films that have been embraced by generations of fans, but for all the scope and detail lovingly packed into the two trilogies, the vast, complex, and dazzling universe dreamed up by J.R.R. Tolkien remains largely unexplored on film. The opportunity to invite fans deeper into the cinematic world of Middle-earth is an honor, and we are excited to partner with Middle-earth Enterprises and Embracer on this adventure. The deal not only is not... I misread that. The deal is not only a coming home for Lord of the Rings, but also a reunion for DeLuca. The executive was president of production for New Line when the first film in the earlier trilogy, Fellowship of the Ring, began production, but he was famously let go before the movie was released. So do I think that this is going to be a direct shot, direct competition to Rings of Power? You bet your fucking ass it is, because even this article from Screen Rant here acknowledges it in the headline. Warner Bros. just destroyed the Rings of Power, and I'm going to read you this one paragraph here because it perfectly sums it up. Unfortunately, the new movies will likely be in direct competition with Rings of Power. While on the whole, the Rings of Power was favorably received by critics, it was less loved by general audiences. This is down to a few reasons, but one of them is simply that audiences didn't, and likely won't, care as much about the characters from the Rings of Power TV show the same way they did for the characters from the Lord of the Rings movies. If the new movies bring back familiar characters, it's certain to draw more attention away from the Rings of Power. Yes and no with regard to this last statement here. If the new movies bring back familiar characters, it's certain to draw more attention away from the Rings of Power. I would argue it didn't work for The Hobbit. Right, you were bringing in characters like Legolas into the Hobbit movies, despite Legolas not being a character in the Hobbit books. Right, they only brought in Legolas just simply for fan service and nothing more. Almost like a nudge on the arm, where hey, remember Lord of the Rings? Hey, remember Orlando Bloom and Legolas, despite the fact that he never appeared in the book. So now you can no longer call our Hobbit movies a faithful adaptation of the book. Yeah, remember that? Pepperidge Farm remembers. And I would argue that audiences aren't going to give a shit about Rings of Power, because as the Hollywood Reporter article brings up, the Rings of Power is set during the Second Age. And the Second Age was not really written about in great detail when Tolkien was alive. The Silmarillion was a collection of short stories, but most of that was set during the First Age and the beginning of the Third Age. The only thing that was really written about the Second Age was the sinking of Numenor, and that was really it. And I would argue that the Rings of Power showrunners and writers deliberately chose the Second Age because of that fact, because it wasn't as well developed, which does have its own pros and cons. But I argue that they picked that out of just sheer laziness, right? That way they would not have to adhere to the Silmarillion, irregardless if they actually had the rights to the Silmarillion or not, and they wouldn't have to adhere to The Hobbit, Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, or Return of the King. They could basically do what they wanted to do because, well, it's... because it's set thousands of years, because Rings of Power is set thousands of years prior to The Hobbit. Therefore, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to have that much of an impact. And we can make all these changes to the lore, and then we could write it off as, well, it's set thousands of years prior, and the Second Age wasn't really that developed. Blah 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 blah, all that bullshit. So my reaction to this news, good for Lord of the Rings. At least there is now some competition that, that movies are coming out from New Line. Now more movies are going to be coming out from New Line Cinema, not just that War of Rohirrim, I think is, again, how you pronounce it. I don't remember how you pronounce it, but still, the fact that these movies are coming out should have Amazon basically now shaken in their boots. And guys, I'm going to go ahead and end this right here because I've probably gone on way longer than I needed to go. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me long enough, I'm terrible at ending these videos, so I will just see you guys next time.